Hello YouTube, this is Matt Pullen and this is the second of our subscriber submitted games that I will be analyzing here on this channel. After I get through this game, I will be more than halfway through my stack of user submitted games. So this game right here was brought to us by Chris Werefritz, and I do not know anything about the location of this game or the ratings of the players involved, but I know that Chris was white and lost fairly quickly, so let's see if we can help Chris. I've not made any notes on this game so far. I just have copied down the moves that were played in the game. I have seen this game a few times, so we're gonna take it from here. So Chris plays e4, and the opponent is playing a Sicilian defense, and Chris plays the open Sicilian. And after knight takes, there's pawn to e5. So it's a dynamic move, or giving up some squares on the d file in order to achieve a foothold in the center and gain time on white's knight. So Chris correctly goes to knight b5 and is preparing to jump into d6 for check, which would displace black's king or force him to exchange his bishop. And usually black does one of two things in response to this move. He can transpose into the Sveshnikov variation with knight to f6. This is a counterattack on white's pawn on e4. So after knight c3 to defend it, now we have d6. d6 mechanically stops the knight from going to d6 because now the black queen will defend the d6 square. So here white is following up with bishop g5, and the idea to pin this knight, which watches over the key d5 square, which is a hole in black's position, which white will try to exploit. And so after like a6, and the knight goes back, and b5, which performs the important function of keeping this knight from coming to c4 and pressuring black's d6 pawn. It also happens to threaten pawn to b4, forking the knights, but obviously white's not going to allow that to happen. He jumps with the knight into d5, putting more pressure on the pinned piece on f6. So here black is breaking this pin, and then white is exchanging for the knight. And after bishop takes or g takes, they're both valid moves. We have the start of the Sveshnikov system in the Sicilian. Now black has conquered some space, but he also clearly has some weaknesses. So back from here, there's also pawn to d6. Again, stopping the knight from going to d6, because now the queen protects that square. And this is like the Sveshnikov without the knights on f6 and c3. This provides white with the possibility of setting up from Roxy bind with pawn to c4. But it also introduces a possibility for black after, let's say, a6, knight c3, bishop e7, the possibility of delaying this knight development, leaving the knight on g8 for now, with the eye of playing a bishop to g5 maneuver. The purpose, well, since black's pawns are more or less fixed on dark squares, this is black's bad bishop, and he would like to exchange it for white's good bishop in c1. And after this dark square bishop is off the board, the rest of black's development, bishop e6, knight f6, rook c8, trying to maybe put pressure on, knight a5 or something, put pressure on the c4 pawn, or play for b4 to try and open the queen side. Without this bad bishop on the board, black's development is just very fluid. So that's the idea of that variation. But no, neither of those were played in this game. 5a6 was played by Chris's opponent, and this is also a known variation for black. It's called the Lowenthal, and well, to get anything out of this, I mean, white has to go in for this check. It's a moral victory if white retreats this knight. So after knight d6 check, there's bishop takes and queen takes and queen f6. And these moves happened, and so this is the start of the Lowenthal variation where black, has given up his bishop. So white has the bishop pair. Black does not have a dark square bishop. And in fact, black has some weaknesses possibly on the dark squares and weaknesses on the d file. But in exchange for this, black is developing fairly quickly. White's queen on d6 is attacked. If the queen exchanges for black's queen, then black recaptures with a knight, and he's got 2 knights in play. White has no pieces. So black is developing the pieces quickly, and will possibly put pressure on white's position. But white has all sorts of long-term advantages. So Chris played queen d1, a move which I don't really like, but it's been played by lots and lots of people. So don't take my word for it. Queen d1 is probably fine for white. Has a good reputation. I actually think it is fairly best for white to just exchange queens on f6, because in the main lines of the Lowenthal, when this queen deploys to g6, it's very influential because it makes it difficult for white to develop the king side. So as opposed to just retreating the white queen and have it not really doing anything, it's good to exchange, even if it allows black to bring his other knight out. That's my view on this. Also, a move that gets played sometimes is queen c7, just sort of plopping this queen down into the heart of black's position, where he can't easily eject it. So this is an aggressive move, but I'm not really. Black is just going to develop around this queen on c7, and I'm not really sure how much of an impact this is going to have on black's game. But nevertheless, this move has been played before, queen c7. And I don't know, let's just look at queen takes on f6. So after knight takes f6, knight c3, with the idea that white would like to try to prevent this pawn to d5 break, because if he can, then black is going to be settled with a weak d pawn. But there's knight b4. Again, usually when the queen vacates from queen 1, the queen bishop pawn is weak, and white has to respect this because it's forking his king and rook potentially. So bishop d3. It does allow black to exchange for the bishop if he wants to, but it develops a piece, guards c2, guards e4. It's a good move. And here black can get in his d5 break. And if he doesn't get in the d5 break, then I assume that white is going to be playing a3 and kicking this knight. So, d5, and then e takes d5, and here, black can play knight takes, but after just knight takes, knight takes, and bishop d2, we've got a position where white has caught up. He's got no major problems in his development, and he's got the bishop pair going for him. So another alternate way that black can play this is to play knight takes bishop, and then after pawn takes bishop f5. Black is down a pawn, but he's playing some kind of a gambit system that's predicated on these d pawns being weak. So yeah, that is. Those are some possibilities after the queen exchange on f6, which is the simplest way for white to play the position. I think it gives some chances for the advantage. So after queen f6, let's just go to queen d1, which was played in the game, and Chris's opponent played queen g6, which is correct. Again, we see the queen putting pressure on g2, which is discouraging the bishop from developing, since the bishop has to guard on g2, and also threatening e4. So white's next move, knight c3, is natural. And knight ge7 was played by Chris's opponent. It's also possible for black to play d5 here. And the idea of d5, well, similar to the game, if e takes d5, then knight b4, and there's a concrete threat to take on c2, and it is difficult for white to meet this. But instead of e takes d, I think knight takes d5, and queen takes e4 check, bishop e2 is supposedly good for white. If queen takes g2, there can be it can be answered by bishop f3, protecting the rook. And also white is threatening to, jump in with this knight to, c7 or b6. So, yeah, that is the immediate d5 also has to be considered in preparing for this line. Also, so knight e7 looks logical, develops a piece which will support either d5 or f5. And here, bishop e3 was played by Chris, which is a fine move, develops a piece. It's been played many times. Also a move in this position to try to exploit the this queen on g6. White is playing h4, and this is quite a popular move because h5 attacking the queen is a very real possibility, because black's queen, although it's well placed on g6, it doesn't have a lot of squares to run to. If black is meeting this h4 push with h5, to block the push, then white maybe can play rook h3 with the idea of now coming to the rook g3 and pressuring the g file for black. And I believe Kramnik has played this variation before against the Lowenthal with the h4 and rook h3. So also worth looking into. But bishop e3 was played, which is logical, and black answers with d5. I think black really cannot afford to wait too long before playing this d5 move. So he plays it now, and then knight takes d5. Of course, e takes d5 is probably also okay, although he has to answer to knight b4. I think if e takes d5, knight b4, maybe rook c1, because this knight is guarding a2, as opposed to what we're about to see that happened in the game, where these knights were off the board and white's knight did not guard a2. So that is possible as well. But knight takes d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, knight b4, and all of a sudden there's a big problem, because this c2 pawn is attacked by two pieces. And how does white protect this pawn? You can't play rook c1 here, because then just knight takes a2, hitting the rook, and then the knight's going to go back to b4 and attack c2 again. So I don't really see any move other than what Chris played in the game here, which is well, maybe rook rook c1 might be the after knight takes a2, rook a1, knight b4, rook c1. I mean, it's a repetition if black wants it. So already white is giving up the possibility of a draw, which is less than ideal. But I think perhaps black can go for more by intensifying this pressure on the c2 pawn. So basically only black can win in that line. So I mean, maybe that was best, because what Chris played in the game, bishop d3, ended up pretty terrible. I mean, it's not necessarily the worst thing if the pawns were to get doubled up, but he was just dropping this g2 pawn, and he has to respect the threat if queen takes h1. So white decided to play king d2 to protect the rook, and then black just grabbed this pawn. And then this is just very nasty, and I don't have much. I mean, there's no real defense to this. Black is threatening e4, and also maybe just exchange here and follow up with bishop f5, which is what happened in the game. White played a3, which is basically a lost tempo. But I mean, what else is there? Okay, you know, king c1 maybe. Just get the heck out of there. There's like knight takes and pawn takes, and I think no, actually I take it back. I think this is losing actually because of bishop g4, because the queen has to stay on the rook on h1. The queen also has to stay on the the d pawn. Because if black's queen can take this, and then rook comes over as mate. So so I think queen f1 is forced here, but then bishop e2, and it's just ouch. So yeah, that is king c1 loses by force, but I mean, so does what happened in the game. a3, knight takes, c takes, and bishop f5, taking this pawn twice. So I mean, even though there's opposite color bishops, I mean, black's pawn structure is is the healthier one here, and black is going to be up 2 pawns, and white's king is floundering around in the center. So after queen e2, rook d8, white resigned, rightfully so. So what happened here? Let's go back, because there doesn't really seem to be any improvement after after the knight comes into b4, because there's no other defense to the c2 pawn, either bishop d3 or rook c1. So so I think was the last decision that white made here. He took on d5 with the pawn. What if the queen is taking on d5? Obviously, knight b4 can't happen because of the queen takes e5 check. I mean, this does give up a tempo to bishop e6, and then I don't know where white's queen goes. Could go to d2, with the idea of developing with the bishop d3 in front of it. It could go to c5. The benefit of this is it prevents black from castling. And this queen can't be kicked because of the the weak b6 square. B6 pawn is not supported by its brother pawn on a7. So queen c5 is a logical move here. I mean, yeah, white is dropping e4, but white is going to drop e4 anyway. He can't hold on to this. So let's say queen c5, and then what is black playing here? Does he play rook c8? Does he just take this pawn? I think like queen takes and c3 here, stop this knight from coming in. Yeah, it's so what's material like here? The pawns are even. I mean, white has a bishop pair. He's got some difficulties getting his king, to safety, but black also has difficulties here getting his king to safety. So this would have been, I'm not sure how white is doing here statistically, but this is definitely preferable to what happened in the game. And I'd say white definitely has chances to win here. So yeah, I guess that was just a blunder. I mean, it looked like a very ordinary move, e takes d5, but I mean, I think queen takes d5 has to be played here. So there you go, Chris Wehrfritz. Now you have some ideas on how to handle this variation in the Lowenthal. In this particular position, you have to take with the queen on d5. And in this position, you have some choices here. Queen d1 was definitely very possible, but you can also consider just taking on f6 and playing very simply with knight c3, bishop d3, etc. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this miniature subscriber game. And yes, we'll still be doing other types of videos in the future. And there you have it. Have a good day, YouTube.